Okay, Steve Mongelli, how are you? Happy New Year. Happy 2022. How are you doing?
I'm well. Thanks a lot, Drew. How are you?
Yep, I'm doing great. So for folks on the line, folks hearing this after the fact, welcome. Thank you for joining. I know we're starting to have a great clip of opportunities to talk to the market via webinars like these. So appreciate folks who are rejoining us, and for folks that may be just chatting with us for the first time, appreciate you joining as well. Um, just as a introduction and a kickoff, my name is Drew Corbett. I'm Clarity's Vice President of Product Innovation. Have joined on to Clarity in the last couple of years, really to support some of the direction that we think Clarity can go in the healthcare industry to best support the market, best support our clients. And we know that foundational to that is what happens during the open enrollment period every year. I mean, that is sort of the Super Bowl of events within the correspondence industry, and it's one that we wanted to, now that we are in I guess first day of February 2022 here. I think everyone is taking a breath after what was an unbelievable set of circumstances that we had to work through during this previous year's open enrollment. And Steve, as our president and CEO, I think what we really also wanted to do was um, share some perspective with the broad industry. And as chaotic as the external events, whether they were COVID or labor shortages or paper short, any of those things, what's the signal through the noise on, as we as health plans try to work with the best and most leading practice partners out there on anything from correspondence to any other services we have, but what is that baseline of what the industry really should expect from correspondence partners now, and how did that look through our open enrollment, and really just anchor people in this time of early in a new year where we're taking stock of how things have gone, taking stock of how we want to make improvements, and help establish our expectations as to what some of those things can look like. So um, I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself in a moment, but is that a fair recap of where we'd like to spend time today?
Yeah, I think that sounds great, Drew.
Yeah. So um, I know a lot of people on the phone actually. They are probably familiar with Clarity, maybe meeting you for the first time. I know one of the things when I joined on with Clarity that I was really attracted to in our leadership team was just the tenure of Clarity and the tenure of the leadership team within Clarity is almost one and the same. And I know you've been through diverse set of roles, circumstances, and I think value add to this conversation, you've seen it from a lot of perspectives. Would you share just your background and what brought you to where you sit now with Clarity?
Sure, absolutely. I have been with Clarity since we started Clarity. So I was one of the original founding business partners, and as you said, Clarity as a company is now close to 15 years old. So not a new entrant into the space by any means. But when you start as a startup within the healthcare IT space, and you're part of the leadership team, you get the benefit of wearing every hat in the organization. And so, from operations to planning and analysis to sales, and obviously, in the position that I'm in now for the last several years, which is running the organization with the leadership team and the extended leadership team. Prior to Clarity, I like to say to our clients at the time, I really spent over a decade on the client side of what Clarity is in the industry. So I spent many years working for insurance organizations, health insurance organizations, in leadership roles, particularly around marketing, product development, and focused in and around enrollment. So my experience centered around the acquisition of members and communicating to those members, whether that was doing it through internal practices at these large organizations or through working through outsourced partnerships. And so I had a really unique point of view of what it was like to have to manage the expectations to get critical touch points out, to gain and to retain effectively membership. I felt really well positioned when we came up with the concept of clarity and how we could really influence, not only communicating with members, particularly of healthcare organizations, but to really try to drive engagement of those members and serve them the way that they want to be served. So it's been a long, 25 plus year history of working in and out of the space. And obviously, as we've had our journey here at Clarity, we've continued to learn and refine what's best practices. So I'm excited to have the conversation today, just in general terms, thinking about open enrollment particularly, and what good looks like and what we try to model ourselves after.
Yeah, I know that even internally, we've recently been having meetings as an organization where we're taking stock of what went well, what do we want to do better. I mean, we sort of take the retrospective approach every time we go through an open enrollment and say, how can we tweak our own practices? I think the industry is doing the same. And our clients, I know, are going through and saying, what can we do as we look forward to, it's not that far away, really, open enrollment for this coming year. And there's value to the recency of learnings, both the wins and some of the things that were more challenging. So while it in some ways feels counterintuitive to be sitting in February talking about an upcoming OE, I actually think it's the time that some of these insights might be most actionable. Just to give folks listening a little bit of a preview, I mean, what we wanted to talk about today are really what are some of the keys to a successful open enrollment, and help you sort of reconcile, does that feel like what we just went through, or does that feel like something we might want to go do some tweaking for the upcoming year? We're going to talk through preparation. We're going to talk about the value of being really, really healthcare focused as a correspondence partner, the security and the compliance, how user friendly our applications, what does our service team look like? So just to give a little preface to the agenda, but Steve, I guess I'd almost open it broadly. 10 years of doing this on the industry side, and then 15 being with Clarity on the services side, you've seen some storms, is my guess. But I wonder how you look at open enrollment, October through January of 2021 to 2022. How did this compare? What was this year like?
It was unlike any other, and every year you can say that because open enrollment has a lot of unique characteristics each year, depending on conditions. But I truly can say that this past open enrollment period that really concluded a couple weeks ago, from an intensity perspective, for everyone within the industry, was unlike any other, and a lot of it obviously had to do with the pandemic that we're still managing our way through, Drew. And the interesting part is, there were a couple different, facets to it that really kind of stand out, and one is directly related to the pandemic itself, which I'll touch on. The others are sort of the macroeconomic conditions that the pandemic has caused, that I think service providers are feeling, we as consumers are feeling every day in our life. Obviously, our healthcare partners are feeling as well, all in a little bit of unique circumstances. But for this past year, one of the things that was one of the major hurdles was you think about the staffing and the labor market, right? So we hear about it all the time. You see it when you drive down the street. There's more help wanted signs out there. There are folks willing to take the jobs. And from a communications perspective, when you think about open enrollment and the volumes that generally come through, it's very seasonally oriented. I mean, you're talking about mid-October through mid-January. And so for facilities that have to put through that type of spike or high volume communications, it takes a lot of experience and a lot of coordination. You also have to have experience in staffing and seeking up and bringing in help that can actually support that model. Because for 10 months out of the year, the demand isn't as rigorous, specifically around healthcare. So it's really important to be able to think about that and forecast. And given what's gone on with the pandemic market. Obviously, the Great Resignation, you hear about it all the time. There was less folks looking to take roles. So, that was certainly a facet that created a unique element this year. The supply chain is another huge, consideration. Again, we see in our daily lives with inflation going up, there's more demand, there's less availability of materials. And as you think about the communication space, there are all kinds of raw materials that play into that. There's paper, there's obviously toner or ink, there's other materials and envelopes, you name it. There's a big logistics effort that goes into planning for all of those things, and making sure that you have enough of it to support the volume that's forecasted. So given the supply chain, the slowdown in availability of materials, that's another facet that was there. And then obviously the third was the pandemic itself, I'd say. For everyone, particularly, coming into the holidays this year, the latest variant and the surge associated with that, we're still kind of coming out of it now, I think, as a country, or it's sort of moving its way across the country a little bit. There was, another instance of COVID that really impacted a lot of folks from a health perspective. So you ended up getting call outs, you're getting folks that were sick. So you have to plan for that from a contingency perspective. So, those are huge, I think, just pandemic related challenges that have come out of OE. And, the other sort of non-pandemic related ones of a perfect storm was, the forthcoming of regulatory changes within the healthcare space. So, we've talked about it in other webinars. I think we're constantly providing information and trying to be helpful for our clients. But with the No Surprise Act, coming into 2022, around the transparency and cost, it's generated a lot more activity for health plans to have to communicate clearly, and within the guidance that's been put out there, get compliant with what's a member should expect to have as far as information. So, that nuance happening at the same time of those pandemic macroeconomic conditions created a really unique situation of higher volumes and obviously more challenges to support those volumes. Yeah. And, I'd say that, in preparation for those things, forecasting has never been more important, right? Forecasting, and then the clear reporting and visibility of work status is critical. So to be successful with those types of conditions, and I think as you said it, we do it all the time. We go right from open enrollment to thinking about next year's open enrollment, and our plans are doing it. It's a constant lessons learned, and how do we apply best practices moving forward. And I think we have to become accommodated, just like we have over the last 2 years, that some of the elements from this year, good or bad, might become the norm moving forward. So forecasting and understanding, how our plans are doing, where are they within their forecasted enrollments, cross lines of business from Medicare Advantage to commercial to individual, and how the cadence of that work will flow through, take it those 8 weeks, is really, really critical, because everything else gets aligned to that. Where do you need your labor? Where are you with your inventory? And then where are you with your planning to be able to take in the work and move the work through a calendar that meets the expectations of your clients?
And so, I think about, I use a sports analogy of the weather affects both teams on the field. And so some of these macroeconomic and other macro factors were sort of affecting the entirety of the industry. And we start to think about, let's pick preparation and forecasting off the shelf and say, what is it that Clarity is trying to do to make that the easiest bridge over to a successful OE? In other words, where we having conversations or investing in technologies that make Clarity really a bellwether of how it's done right?
Yep. Yeah, I think it's all in the planning and the preparation and the communication. And so using Clarity has always been focused exclusively into the healthcare space. So we have the benefit of, now close to 15 years of understanding how each of the lines of business within the healthcare market, whether that's Medicare, Medicaid, commercial, the cycles typically flow. And so we have a phenomenal benchmark of data, and we build that up client by client to use as a starting point for forecasting. Because a lot of times our health plans are challenged to understand where their forecasts are going to come in. They don't have clear visibility into the sales cycle. So you need a place to start. And so starting and using the benefit of the industry at large and what plans look like within their cohorts really allow us proactively from an account management perspective to come up with models around forecasted volumes. And you have to start somewhere. There's always going to be surprises. Volumes may come in higher, they may come in lower, but generally, plus or minus within some percentage, you're going to be where you need to be. That allows us to start working with the plans to say, okay, this is the starting point. So you can build up the labor models, you can build up the material models that you need, and then you can overplan. And this year was tough with that, right, given the circumstances. But if you start the process early enough, and for us, best practices, that conversation begins in the summer, right? Which, late spring, early summer. And it obviously is an iterative process that you build up from a forecasting perspective over time. And it allows you to get to a place where you can really work as a partner, meaning a service provider like a Clarity and a plan to say, okay, we now have an idea around the forecasted volumes that are going to need to be supported from a communications perspective. Now let's talk about the priorities that need to happen. What lines of business need to precede others? What groups within lines of business need to precede others? And it's a very, very, very complex and well orchestrated process to be successful. And that's the process that we've employed and have placed. Use the data, use that data to build a plan, use that plan to make sure that you are on the same page from a communication expectation perspective, because what's important is that information needs to move forward for our health plans to their market. As soon as they can communicate to their brokers, their sales channels, their prospective groups of when they should start to expect things, that's going to make in open enrollment the difference between a successful one and one that isn't successful. And obviously there's curveballs that happen from time to time, Drew, but if you can have that forecasting and you can have a clear communication plan and then the reporting that shows where you are in that process, from our experience, that's created the most successful outcomes. And that's why this past year was a large success for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think you brought up that idea of healthcare specificity in our practice and in our experience. And I think that is, having been in different arenas in my career, but always adjacent to healthcare, I think you see organizations, external organizations all the time saying, hey, we have a practice and healthcare is a big market. So if we just take our practice, we can easily go service the healthcare market. And within our correspondence and the nuance, not only around what's going on with MA or a Medicaid plan, or we've got an ACO this year, or we've got a new partnership, et cetera, all of those nuances, I think there's no value for the experience of sort of having done those things, especially because the world doesn't stop when we're planning for OE. I mean, we still have ANOCs that need to go out. We still have 1095s that need to go out. So you start to ask an organization to juggle all of those through the lens of do you really have deep healthcare expertise? And I think it's where balls can drop. And it's a place where the focus on healthcare as an industry, I think, has been valuable of navigating what the buoys are up ahead.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So could you talk a little bit more about maybe just a glimpse under the hood of things? But there are a lot of different ways that that fulfillment can be executed, but some of the ways that Clarity has really played chess with where we've sort of placed our assets to make sure not only do we execute in good times at a very high level, but in really challenging times, we've sort of mitigated the likelihood of risk. I wonder if you could maybe speak to some of those things that are really near and dear to Clarity's heart.
Yeah, I think, as we think about experience in the space, and obviously years of experience now executing against this, if you think about, what are sort of the important criteria to really make some decisions around how to best proceed. And if you're an organization, you're a healthcare organization, and everyone has the same requirements around getting out communications in and around the same time period, right? What are the things that we think about as sort of criteria to make that judgment? So first and foremost, and I'll take them as they're kind of coming to mind, but I think a criterion that's that was a differentiator for a while, Drew, but now is honestly table stakes. Is what is, if you're looking at prospective partners to help navigate things like open enrollment, security and compliance are critical. It used to be the advent of, well, this is really important. How are we going to handle it? What is this high trust? I can't underscore enough that whomever health plans are working with, and this is where Clarity chose to make these investments in play, you need to have a culture around security and compliance. And then that's why for us, our singular focus has been on healthcare. So we're not distracted by other industries that we're serving who have different needs and also competing needs for capacity or for fulfillment requirements. Mm-hmm. We're 100% focused in and around the acquisition of data, how to handle that data, how to exchange that data, and how to distribute it in a meaningful way, whether that's electronically in print. So, and that's a really important feature, I think, understanding and sadly, as a byproduct, you're hearing some of the fallouts in the space on a regular basis, where there are some gaps in security posture and compliance. So, that's a critically important thing to consider, when you think about how do you successfully navigate the space with a partner. The other one is kind of part and parcel with that is who are the clients of the prospective partner you're looking to work with. Having a peer network that looks a lot like you is important. So, does your partner, outsourced partner, have a diverse set of clients? Are they serving a bunch of different industries? That could be difficult to navigate, particularly in a very, very intense seasonal time like open enrollment, where capacity and need for capacity is going to grow. And having a lot of disparate processes set up within a facility or facilities could be difficult to navigate. So having a partner that's focused within particularly the healthcare industry is critical, and that's going to set the tone, obviously, for how is the distributed network set up? Do you have redundancy within your own facilities to make sure that in December, when volumes are higher than they ever are during the rest of the year, you can weather downtime? Can you have a network of partners where you can send work that is also a secure facility that has the same setups to manage the same communications and get them out? So having scalability and built-in redundancy from a business continuity is really important feature to think about as far as choosing who's going to be there. And then obviously, what are sort of the techniques that are used as it relates to creating and distributing the healthcare communications? Are the downstream partners thinking about the most efficient ways and the most effective ways to get the communications out? One of the things that this past year for Clarity, over the course of the year, we'll have sent out over 85 million ID card packages. That's just one example of a communication. And as people think about open enrollment, there's a huge amount of volume that goes out for it. It's a very critical touch point. A lot of folks are aligned to a 1/1 effective date. So getting that right, getting it timely, and making sure it's impactful is really critical. And being able to think about the different, equipment, technology, and practices to create those effectively is important. So, how are your partners thinking about those products at scale and being able to produce them at scale? And, for us, you're always judged, on a couple metrics at the end of the year. Was everything timely? Was everything right from a data perspective? Was it secure, and not only secure in data, but secure in how it was produced and sent out from a receiving perspective? You want to avoid, obviously, anything like misinformation going out to members. So there's a lot of factors that go into thinking about the experience of your partner and in the space as it relates to open enrollment. And each of those are criteria that over time, both for myself personally prior to Clarity as well as during these years, you see more and more the need for those factors for serving clients and making their open enrollment successful. And that's why we've continued to reinvest in those areas to make sure that we're sort of forging a path in the right direction.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what I observed being here through the past 4 months is your ability to be nimble, your ability to have control sort of up and down the supply chain of ultimately what ends up being a piece of member correspondence is it's really important, because to expect that the waters are going to be calm is sort of fooling yourself. And so it's not about anticipating every specific adversity that's going to come up in an operating year. It's more about, do you and your team and your equipment and your technologies, have they been built around flexibility to say, we gotta scale this up a little bit, we gotta hire a little bit more. I think it's one of the places that Clarity really weathered well over the past 4 months, was that ability to say, sure, that's a problem that we weren't expecting, but within reason, we've got the levers to adjust, and we can control those levers to help mitigate it as well as possible. Is that a fair kind of assessment of how you look at it from the driver's seat?
Absolutely. I mean, you have to build into the practice that type of flexibility, and knowing that there are going to be changes that happen. A lot of times, those changes either they happen external to your control as a service provider, meaning within the market, our health plans, their enrollments come in differently than expected. The timing and availability of data and eligibility data and enrollment data to them is different than expected. And then, in the moment, as you said, things will happen, right? It's at the end of the day, you're producing millions and millions of communications, and you're dealing with resources, you're dealing with equipment, you're dealing with materials. And so safeguarding and being flexible both in process and in the way to move work is critical. So for example, it's happened before, it'll happen again. Clarity's built up a redundant network. So we have dedicated resources and equipment and facilities that we own. We also have partnerships that have built a process around our requirements to be able to take work. So whether that's weather, you're dealing with open enrollment across the country, whether that's weather and you're having a closure for a day because of a storm, or a piece of equipment goes down that can't come back online, being able to uniformly have vetted, secure, approved business associates that you can have approved through your client network and have print tested and make sure that they're in that network. From a fail-safe perspective, being able to continue to move work is and keep it going is critical. And that's something that if you think about it, having that continuity is unbelievable, because the window's so short. Our plans unfortunately don't have the benefit of having months to get communications out. They have days. Right. And making sure that you can get it out timely with the same quality throughout your network is critical. And that takes a huge investment, Drew, and obviously building up those practices and making sure that you can lean on a distributed network that way is important. So that's an example where you need to be nimble and you need to be able to be flexible to support that. And it's just one of many across a bunch of different topics.
I mean, it's the depth of the partnership network too. Now I'm compounding a couple things that you've said. So it's one, do we have the capacity sort of, let's say, in-house? Check. And a lot of people could check that box and then say, well, what if there's more equipment goes down or something else is needed due to adverse weather or something else? Do you have the partner network set up? And then you layer onto that, how is the partner network's focus in the healthcare industry? Or how is their compliance? Or how is their high trust certification?
Right.
I think it's one of those where if you lean on a partner, how hard can you lean before it starts to be painful. And the deeper you have that security and compliance, the deeper you have that healthcare DNA up and down your partner chain, your supply chain, et cetera. I think that's when you see a really durable solution, as to one that when the wind speed starts to pick up, they start to shake a little bit.
Yep. No, completely. I think it's, as I said, it's a very well orchestrated process, and you have to have all of those requirements down the line. And for our clients, the health plans and healthcare organizations in the world, it provides a peace of mind, because again, you're talking about very specialized, and in many cases, very specialized output for communications that need to happen annually throughout the year, with a very intense focus over a short period of time, given the way this works. So knowing that, you've gone through and looked at business continuity, disaster recovery, and you're holding all those standards all the way down the line through quality and security, is a huge security blanket, quite frankly, for clients, and one that's really critical. And you mentioned it. We talk about security and compliance. I mentioned it as sort of a guiding criterion as you think about who you should look for with the right experience in the print and fulfillment industry. And it's now it was a differentiator at first, but it's table stakes now. And so it's really important that the vendor is very exclusively focused on that as part of the process, not just acquiring data to compose and create all of these high volume, highly variable communications, but how does that go all the way through the process to print manufacturing, which is really, really important. And there's a couple areas, that we think about from a security compliance perspective. There's the obvious ones, which are, you think about all the controls that you need at a facility level, making sure only the right folks have access to the right equipment, materials, and output that goes out there. So you need to structure your workflows around that. And part of that is the individuals you bring in, your training practices, the backgrounds, the screenings that you're doing. All of that is part and parcel with knowing what the requirements are around certifications like HITRUST, which is the gold standard, quite frankly, in the industry. And you can have those controls in place across data all the way down to manufacturing. So that's an area where you really need to make sure that that investment is there, because the exposure and the risk is way too high. Again, you see it every day now, sadly, in the news, and it's beyond just reputational risk for our clients, or quite frankly, for anybody who's supporting and securing them. And so understanding that that's become a culture around security and compliance is important, and really understanding what is sort of the historical performance like in that space. Have there been breaches in the past? What are they? Have they been reportable breaches? What is the process when there is information shared in regards to potential disclosure? How is that researched? How is it closed from an incident report perspective? Those things are really important, and I think it's not often top of mind when folks look in the industry for providers. Sadly, they might shop on price first, and then they might shop on capability. But digging in and looking at those things have a huge important value at the end of the day. And honestly, when you start thinking about service providers that aren't exclusively focused on healthcare, it's an expensive proposition. Yeah. Building a culture of compliance and security, getting HITRUST certified, maintaining that stance, applying it not only from a software perspective down to manufacturing, it takes a lot of time and energy. So, we have often found, and we've heard, and I saw it personally before prior to Clarity, when you start to look at capabilities of potential providers and they're focused on a lot of different things, if their footprint is only this big in healthcare, the investment to support it the way it needs to be supported isn't often justified. So you're taking
to the opportunity. Yeah,
you're taking a very calculated risk there if it isn't there, and you're going to have to obviously respond to and explain why you did that down the road. So that's a really, really important thing. And it even goes into the experience of, as you think about those providers who are taking data, potentially providing composition services, and then physically producing and distributing communications, how are they reinvesting in ways to make sure that you're safe and compliant as a healthcare organization? So for example, for us, we've built out applications that have safeguards in place around addressing. You see it all the time that someone has put in an errant piece of data that can show up in an address window in an envelope. And, it's a disclosure either about health or about personal information, and making sure that, the applications that take the data and that create communications are actually protecting you as an organization from sometimes those mistakes happening are really important. You can't underscore them enough. And it obviously takes years of experience servicing and providing for it. But, on the receiving end, these are things that I think sadly, probably folks who are listening to this today and in the future, probably going to nod their head saying like, oh yeah, yep.
I've seen that.
I
saw
this.
that one.
And or that's happened to me. And that's really important to think about moving forward, so
I'm just even thinking about the example in sort of a casual sense in my mind, but to a partner that might serve multiple industries, and a file is getting passed around of something that ultimately needs to go out to those 100,000 or million people. What you don't want is for everyone who sends that file to say, oh, by the way, this is a healthcare file. Because if you're in a position where people are saying, oh, this is consumer production, this might be for some other B2B industry, but remember that this one is now we got to put our healthcare hats on. It's almost too little too late. Whereas the alternative being there is nothing but healthcare data here. And so with that sort of high trust badge on is how every row of data is treated. I think that's the difference. And like you said, it's tough to have your cake and eat it too on that. To have healthcare be sort of a subset of the work, but the entirety of the data management expectation, the output production expectation, tough to do culturally.
It's extremely tough to do, and understandably, right? Because you don't have the economies of scale to overinvest in one area. Whereas if you have a very purpose-built organization in and around healthcare, all of the functions start to really mirror best practices, whether that's on the technology side or the manufacturing side of this. You don't need to discern that, oh, this is a healthcare file or this is a healthcare communications going out. The entire process is geared around it and purpose built for it. Not only, on a daily basis, but on an escalating basis around capacity needs as you get to things like year-end or open enrollment. The equipment's there, the process is set up there, and it becomes, again, another one of those areas where you need to really see how your potential partners perform under that kind of stress and how they're set up. Because, I've seen it firsthand, again, as a consumer of the industry for a long time. There's a lot of stuff that will be thrown together to try and, to serve the need. And you can get away with that for a while, but eventually, unfortunately, it can come back in spades. So,
yeah. A little bit of a shift, but I wonder if we kind of put our heads into day in the life of a client over these past 4 months. And I'm curious in particular about just a couple of arenas. One, what does the experience look like of how customer friendly are some of the applications and some of the other hands-on tooling that our clients are using? What did that look like through OE? And I think critically adjacent to that, what does that person's support feel like? I mean, I can only imagine with the amount of pressure that's on our clients or anyone in the industry that's really responsible for that open enrollment correspondence, how much value is there in a phone call from someone saying, hey, we got you, or here's a challenge, but we're right there with you, and here are 3 options I've got for you. So there's kind of a product side of that and a service side of that, but I wonder if you could speak to what that has felt like and how we've been able to sort of establish best practices there.
Sure. Yeah, I think, starting with the what I'll call the technology side of it, Drew, I think, the value of having a application driven process around communications is critical. From my experience, it's grown over time. but you can get really antiquated. And it used to be, hey, I'm going to pass you data, and then it's a black hole, and I hope you create what was supposed to be created, and I hope what goes out looks right, and I hope it's on time. That's impossible to happen in these days, especially with how regulated it is, how much scrutiny there is on the member's experience as a consumer now. So having an application that can provide some flexibility over the process is really important. So when I think about the investments that we've made learning through the years on tools that will really help make your clients successful, a couple of things come to mind, right? So, we talk about the lack of time that healthcare organizations have to take in their enrollments, process them, and then get them all the way through the manufacturing and mail process to members' hands. Within that, you're going to need the ability to kind of indicate, what your priorities are. So one of the things from an application perspective for that reason, we built in things like priority indicators. So health plans can, within their data, either identify key accounts or performance groups, where they may actually have a performance penalty if they don't hit a certain SLA or service level agreement, and make sure that that's flagged within the data, because then the system will allow it to prioritize that over other work within their universe of work. And
Right.
It's a huge benefit, because oftentimes, as a service provider, you don't know that XYZ group is a PG group, and that if materials aren't in hand by a certain date, there's an impact on quality or scores, or even from a financial perspective of the plan. But
Right.
setting yourself up to recognize the data and have the system be able to prioritize that work, that's critical, right?
Yeah.
So that's come in, hugely helpful.
Yeah.
The ability to have our clients, what we consider have production control over some of their data, allows them to plan their work. And what I mean by that is, a lot of organizations have a huge amount of volume will come in, let's say in December, right? They want the benefit of being able to process that data, create all the end communications, but they don't want it all going out, right? They wanted to actually be able to perform quality control over it, see exactly what it's going to look like before they release it to production. So the ability to be able to process those files, hold them, look at them, and then release them when they want to is another critical piece of user-friendly application behavior that allows them to manage when things are going to go out. Because on the receiving end of that, healthcare organizations, they, like manufacturing facilities, have staffed up for member services. They expect a higher volume of phone calls. They have new members, they have returning members. So if everything was going out at the same exact time, right, the flip side to that is they're going to be inundated. So their metrics on how well they're responding to calls, how quickly they're responding to calls, how much they can have the ability to do research gets severely impacted. So having those tools in place to be able to process it, look at it, and release it as they want based on when they want things to get to members is a huge example of how people can use the technology to set themselves up for success.
So interesting. I mean, I'm thinking about, we have a client counterpart that we speak to, 3 times a week, but they're always connected up and down their own organization. So in those 2 examples, if our client just landed a huge commercial account and there is a performance goal associated with the SLAs that, maybe the health plan put into their RFP that they were willing to meet, it really, correspondence is holding the bag of, can we with confidence say that we'll hit that SLA that led to that huge sale?
Right.
To be a business partner on sort of the revenue side there. And then the other example you mentioned is huge cost decisions are being made around customer support, member support, other things like that. And can we be a partner in how that's throttled so that we're actually aligning with what their other cost preparation plans have been? Great points on both of them.
Well, and it's thinking through the experience that they want, or thinking through the experience that we think our clients or the health organization want their members to have and their groups to have. And another one where it just comes to mind is you think about the ability to process those records and release them in a sort of a staged event to have a positive member experience. Another one is the accessibility and availability of the actual communication itself. So Clarity's built an application that allows for multimodal distribution. So we're talking about manufacturing and why you make some decisions around print and mail. It's critical. Being able to render and have that electronic version of the communication, whether that be through a web service or other, be available on a member portal that the healthcare organization makes available to you as your member, or a mobile application, is critical. So processing that and having that integrated and available during high volume times, because there's one more element to all of this, right? There's the USPS, which is out there really working hard through year end, where they're competing with more than healthcare volume, right? The volume in mail services at the end of the year around the holidays is the highest it is during the entire calendar year. So there's a lot of competing factors that sometimes become outside of the health plan's control. And so knowing that there's access to that critical communication in a timely way or in advance of an effective date is critical. So it's another thing that the application needs to allow the organizations to have access to and do. And that's another area where we've invested, in addition to just critical reporting, which kind of goes in part of the second part of your question, Drew, is as we think about the account management side to this, right? What is the sort of importance and sort of judging criterion on a successful open enrollment? Well, communication is everything. We started out the conversation talking about forecasting and when that starts in the year, and using data as a place to help our clients understand what's happened historically. Communicating all the way through then the actual execution period of open enrollment on a daily basis is important. And we've built our application to be hand in hand with the communication process with our account management team, where our clients have full visibility into reporting in what have we received from them from a data perspective, what has been created, what's in queue to be created, when did things actually get made, when have they shipped, and obviously depending on the mail process, where is it in the mail process through an IMB or an intelligent mail barcode. That's critical, because again, information is key. On the downstream to that, our clients are providing information to their groups or to their members. Right. So to be able to have that visibility and access through the application and reporting and our account management teams to know exactly where it is and speak to it is huge. Because, where folks have a black hole of information, it creates a lot of energy, and it creates a lot of stress for people in a really stressful time. And, you're able to really de-stress that situation by having key communication plans in place every day. So almost daily touch-ins with reporting. And then, really at the end of the day, what are the escalation procedures? So things are going to happen in a high volume time, whether that's happening, as I said before, on the client side, or maybe there's something on the manufacturing side. Making sure that going into that period, everyone understands what the escalation procedures are, who are the important points of contact and reach outs, and how do you work that triage is really, really critical. And again, that's 15 years of experience working with clients, and obviously experience for our team working within the industry and other places that have really built a pretty robust process that's all around communication and the visibility of it in the reporting. And that allows, again, our partners at our healthcare organizations to be successful with their leadership teams to provide information on how they're doing. Those days of a black box of I sent it, I'm waiting to find out.
You told me to send it, I sent it. Yeah.
And it's there, it doesn't work anymore. And anyone on this listening on this webinar, now or in the future would totally agree with that. So, you really gotta live that practice of best of breed communicating. You can't over communicate. And making sure that the data is available for folks to be able to self-report when they need to what's out there.
I'll brag for you a little bit with one of the statistics I know you're most proud of, which is around our net promoter score with clients. That's I think if we just did our previous years, it was in the 52 to 55, plus 52 to plus 55, which is, I mean, you start looking at the world through healthcare, and hearing numbers like 55 NPS are just unheard of. So I know that has a lot to do with the investments that have been made, not only on, you know, how often were we talking with our clients in December, which I know was often, but also just the underlying investments that we've made to help. If your client can easily offer that answer when your largest, most strategic account calls and says, hey, what's the latest? And that's not a fire drill. That's a, well, let me get that answer for you real quick. Then it's all the difference in the world, but it doesn't happen without sort of the years of investment into making that easy.
Yeah.
We're about 10 minutes. I'm curious if we've been spending a lot of time talking about the last 4 months and also about the last, 15 years. What's in the headlights for you? What are you excited about?
So, I think obviously this clarity is leaning forward in the future. There's a few things. We have obviously built an organization that's focused really around the relationship that our clients, healthcare organizations, have with their members. And that's been centered on communications, right? Which obviously are critical about, understanding their benefits, educating them, and keeping them happy and healthy over time. And for us, there's a couple things. We're going to continue to invest in our product roadmap. So we talk about year end, and there's a lot of velocity around specific communications that happen that are geared towards open enrollment, but there are many more communications that happen throughout the calendar year. And all of those are really important touch points that you or I receive about our healthcare throughout the year. And, I know as a healthcare consumer that, I still focus on those. When I get them, it's my interaction point out with my healthcare, aside from actually going to see my provider and taking care of myself. So it helps me understand what's changing, where I'm at, how do I utilize these benefits? And so, as the market evolves, as more regulatory changes come, we're going to continue to invest and create more and more of those communications as they come up for our plans, so they can actually work with a single company and feel like they have a platform that hits all of those things. They have visibility into each one of them. They know when they're going out. You start to get a much more coordinated and orchestrated communication campaign to Drew, the member, or Steve, the member. And then within those, where we're really leaning in on just the core strength of the organization is, we have become a real engagement partner for our health plans. And, we've talked a lot about open enrollment today. And we talked about the complexities with it because there is so much volume of touch points that go out during that time period. Well, if we've got all of these requirements and capabilities down of what's going to allow our clients to navigate a successful period, well, then we can start to lean in a little bit more on the data that's coming from our plans with it, the data that we can take from other parties, and we can start to really tune those communications to be more than just check the box and say, yep, I got out the ID card for 1/1 check. I got out the 1095B for March check. Oh, there was a claim. I got the EOB out. That's critical. It's very important. But how do you extend beyond that and sort of take advantage of, I like to call it paid advertising. Our clients are already, they're creating the materials, they're paying for shipping in a lot of cases if it's physical, not digital. And, why not take as much advantage to try to engage that member a little bit further? So, when I look into the future and I see, us continue to invest to perfect all the things that are required to be a successful partner that we've talked about today, taking advantage and leveraging the communications that are part of Clarity's history, it's a huge opportunity. It's a huge opportunity to engage and activate members on behalf of the health plan. And that could be to get them in a digital relationship. It could get them more engaged with their healthcare. It could get them better adherence around their medication. It can any one of those things, Drew, that everyone is now hearing in the space, and I think a lot of our traditional customers who own the responsibility of these communications, they hear in meetings within their organizations saying, this is our key objective.
Right.
We want to really become an accelerant to have those folks be champions within the organization to say, hey, I got an idea. Not only have we got all this down and we've perfected being able to get materials out in a timely, secure, high quality way, but we have a vehicle that you can ride on to really start moving the needle on some of these strategic objectives. I really feel like we're going to be at the intersection point of what was communications over here and engagement over here, and saying they're one and the same. You're scored off of how did that experience go. We've been hearing it for years. If the ID card's late, that's a nightmare. The ID card materials are wrong, that's a nightmare. It's the first experience, and it is. It's how people think about the brand in their wallet of the health plan that they're paying for their coverage. Well, take it one step further. Don't just say got there on time and the information was right. The information was actually much more impactful in my experience. I mean, as a consumer, I look for that in everything I do in my day-to-day life. And that's when I decide who's good and who isn't. And I think the healthcare organization has a huge opportunity in front of them. So that's where we're really guiding our ship, and I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fortunate place that I get to spend most of my time with you on, also, of this idea that you mentioned the 80 million cards and the letters that accompanied those cards that went out over the course of this year. It's funny because I put my hat on of having been around a lot of marketers in my life, and their light bulb turns on when you said, hold on, you talk to the healthcare consumer at 80 million a clip. And if I could insert a message into some of that touch point that you have with them, and by the way, people are always opening the envelope with the ID card in it, or the EOB, or whatever that is. It's interesting because it takes the 15 years of, we have practiced and we've tweaked and we've gained proficiency and then mastery of what I think you referred to as the table stakes of correspondence. And in a way, I think Clarity has found itself saying, now that we've got mastery there, I think we can raise our own ceiling a little bit. And I think we can start talking to you about, if you're trying to get whatever it is, in-home assessments or flu shots or portal registrations, to start sliding those in with that correspondence that we know is extremely high quality and always on time. It's an exciting kind of chapter we're going into.
It truly is, and obviously not driving by all the things that are critical about getting those things done and out, but enhancing them now. And like you said, once we've got that mastery down, and we're always continuing to invest in it and work it, because every situation, every year is unique in some ways, just like we talked about this past year. Let's make sure that we're leveraging the technology and the data to make our plans as successful as possible and take advantage of what's going on. So that's exactly where we're heading.
Yep. Well, like we started off saying, it's an important time of year to reflect, take stock, use the fresh wins or the fresh wounds to say, how are we going to do this better next year? So I appreciate you sort of capturing so much. We're nothing if not punctual. 11:59, right on the button in my time zone. So thank you very much, and we appreciate it. And I know for folks that might have questions, we're pretty easy to access, but we'll make sure that we've got kind of emails, phone numbers, etc., that people can reach out to us.
Great. Thanks a lot, Drew. Appreciate everybody attending.
You bet. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Take care.